How's everyone doing tonight in 12 land? Guess who's back? Me and Dayna, my old partner from the old Field Goals podcast and the I can't even remember the name of the app that we used to do the live watch parties on, but great chance to catch up with Dayna today. Can't wait to get her in here live in front of you all. So get your questions and comments ready. We're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about the process so far in the offseason. How does she feel about how John Schneider and that front office is going about their business of building this roster or rebuilding it, as the case may be on offense, heading into the draft now just a month away. Also going to get her thoughts on the combine. She was there this year, got to talk to a bunch of these prospects and find out which ones just scream Seahawks to her. We've come to find over the years that we can gauge some of that when we listen to these guys speak, right? And then, you know how Dayna likes to talk about the defense. We'll talk about how set she thinks it is. Is there still some work to be done on that side of the ball? When we come back, it's Dayna O'Gorman and me up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
You know, sometimes I think to run this show, I need 3 hands, or at least I just need to change the configuration of my desk here. Maybe we'll do that tomorrow. This show, once again, brought to you by the folks at Doer, built for doing lifestyle apparel for every... That's the wrong video. Let's try this. See what I mean about the third hand? They have flagship stores in Denver and Los Angeles, but you can get everything you need here on shopdoer.com, as long as you spell it right. It's D-U-E-R. Built for doing. And you know how much I love these stretch performance jeans right here. These are my daily go-to, even down here in the desert, because they are made from breathable material. They are 20% stretch, antibacterial, really, really sustainable materials used as well. They move with you. They are also built tough, though, built for doing. They can handle anything you throw at it. And now, if you act right now, you can get 20% off your first order from the folks at Doer. That's at shopdoer.com/forever. ShopDoer, DUER.com/forever for 20% off your first order. God, can you tell? I'm just kind of struggling today with getting stuff up here. Let's get Dayna in here and just fix all of this. Oh my goodness. You would think it's the first time I've ever done this. Just ignore anything that you might see if you're watching at home. You know what? Sometimes mistakes are made. I can't afford a producer. Dayna is where it's at. I got to do all this myself. So
totally. And you know what?
You
it's a Tuesday evening, you know, it just is the way it rolls. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a minute. Yeah. It has been a while. Let's start with this because, you know, everyone that I talked to after all this stuff went down, it's the first time that I've gotten to talk to them. And you always have such a unique perspective. And I always appreciate your ability to balance your passion for the team with your pragmatism.
No, right the first time.
Got it right the first time. I should have quit while I was ahead. Just as we sit here today, a month away from the draft, and you look at the roster and you see all the changes and some of the big sweeping moves that had to be made in the last few weeks, where are you at right now with just where the Seahawks sit?
You're going to hate this answer, but I
don't hate anything you ever say.
It's fine. I got burned so bad on another podcast for just not being super enthusiastic right now, but I'm just not. And I think that is because when it came to this offseason, I think we had some big expectations. Like we were expecting that maybe this would be the year that John Schneider surprised us, and it didn't happen. And, you know, that's okay. I think we all knew Tyler was probably going to be gone. I don't know that he's going to stay gone. We'll see kind of how that ends up. DK was a surprise, but after the Get Got podcast, it was not a surprise at all, right? That was very shocking and enlightening. And I actually like DK a little bit more now than I did before. And then free agency started. You know, that's the new year. You get excited. Here we go. And it was just kind of like it wasn't exciting. Sam Darnold is not exciting. He's fine. I think he'll be good. I think he'll be serviceable. I think that he's not a bad quarterback. I heard him today on SiriusXM NFL radio. They were doing an interview. He is jacked to be in Seattle, or at least he's faking it pretty well, even if he's not. But the interesting thing that he said was that he was excited to be wanted, which I thought was really interesting. I was like, what does that mean? Was he hearing from people that he wasn't wanted? I thought it was an interesting kind of throwaway comment that I would love for them to have asked more about, but they didn't. And the rest of it has just been a little disappointing. I was not as jacked about Cooper Kupp as a lot of people were. I think once again, it's fine. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think that there is a lot of bumps and hurdles that John Schneider still needs to get over to prove to me that he has figured this whole thing out.
It's tough, isn't it? Because, it's one thing to move on from a big name player, someone that we've come to know and love over the years. And every single one of these big moves that was made, we've talked about each of them in a vacuum ad nauseum over the last, some of them 2 years, that some of the local talk show hosts on radio in Seattle have been talking about trading DK for 2 years. There was discussion before Gino's last extension about whether he should, be extended long-term or just be a bridge. And so but then they all happened within like 2 weeks,
within 3 days, seriously. Yeah.
It was like take the Russ trade and the Wagner release and just, pump it up with helium and put it on steroids. It was, that was tough to kind of wrap our heads around it. Have you spent any time thinking about what that must have been like for John though? And the reason I ask you that is, and you've already stated how you feel about the moves as a whole, but just how quickly they went about finding alternatives once all this stuff came down, because I'm, correct me if you feel differently, but I am of the belief that I honestly don't think he saw this coming. I really thought like he says, I take him at his word that he thought they were going to get Gino and DK done. They were going to be part of this thing moving forward. And I think it caught him by surprise, especially how it all happened all at once. So how do you feel about how he was able to, using his word here and the word of Ross Geller, how he was able to pivot? And yeah, exactly. But
it's interesting to me because I agree with you 100%. He did not plan this. And I don't know that he was blindsided, but I think that he thought he could figure this out and make everybody happy. And they fired, Grubb, and he thought that would make DK happy. And they, thought that everyone was on board, or they could figure out a dollar amount to make everybody happy. And that didn't happen. And so I think two things for him. Number one, I think there had to be a huge pivot and a little bit of excuse my language, oh shit moment, right? But at the same time, I think that he was like, oh, okay, then let's do what we can. But there had to be a little bit of an ego bruise there too. Gino left Seattle for Pete. And we know that, right? There's no question. Yes, the money, and we can debate the money back and forth. And I don't really even care about the money. I think this had everything to do with Pete, and that he wanted to go pay for the man who completely believed in him. And I respect Gino for that. And I think that it was probably a fantastic move for him. DK was sick of being in the same situation over and over. Let's be honest about that. So that had to be a little bit of an ego check for John Schneider. But more importantly, he didn't have a lot of time to scramble then at that point. I think that the Sam Darnold thing was always kind of sitting there. I think that they had probably had those conversations. And so like, if we can't get a number with Gino, well, there's always Sam Darnold, right? I think that he did not know what to do with the DK situation. And I'm hoping that he didn't think he fixed it with Cooper Kupp, because he did not, right?
Yeah, no,
but I don't think that that's either. Right. So I think that as quickly as he had to turn, I think that he did an okay job. I'm not a huge John Schneider fan over the last couple of years. I have been, his drafts have been great, but other general management thing, I've not been a huge fan. But I don't dislike him. And I think that he is good at his job. I'm not happy with the way he's doing it. But I think this more than anything, if he turned and looked at Mike and said, okay, what do you see happening next? Then that would make me really happy because that means he's putting some faith back into his head coach. If
Yeah.
he just started throwing numbers out there and trying to find people and scrambling, which we will never know until they do a 30 for 30 or something on him, in so many years,
Right.
then that's a little disturbing. I think this offseason completely lies in the draft. And if they don't nail that draft, John Schneider is on a very hot seat.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page there too. I've been saying for a while, well, more specifically, I've been saying if 2025 goes down the same way that 24, 23, and 22 did, and they just miss out on the playoffs, or they can't take another step, and they seem like they're stuck in that limbo, that middle range that everybody hates so much, and it's because the offensive line failed again, then I think he's absolutely on the hot seat. I do. It's interesting. You touched on some important points there. I think the fact that these, especially the Geno and DK move, they knew what was going on with Tyler. Those conversations have been held over the last couple of months. Tyler even said that himself. DK confirmed that on the Get Got podcast. But the Geno and DK thing kind of, even though it seems like those two things came down independent of each other, that they really didn't have one to do with the other, that they happened so quickly, they happened at the same time, and they affected John, I think, in very different ways. I think the Geno thing, he seemed so willing to move off of it so quickly when he realized that's what Geno wanted, because he's been thinking about this for the last 4 years. He's had to have had quarterback contingency plans locked and loaded, ready to go for the last 4 years. So that was an easy one for him to pivot to. And I agree with you. Having Sam Darnold out there made it unique. Can you imagine if today we're sitting here and we're talking about how, the Seahawks had signed Jameis Winston and, they wouldn't bring Russell back. But you see what I'm saying? Like,
I do.
You could be in the situation the Giants are, right? After Sam Darnold, there was nothing left. With DK, though, I felt like you saw it, especially in that little off-podium moment after the press conference. He seemed hurt by that. Like when he said, I thought we could fix this. I thought we could work it out. That seemed about as genuine and a transparent moment as you can get. And then you watch the podcast that you referred to, and I don't think DK has any, I don't think there's any burned bridges. I don't think there's any animosity. He just wanted a change. And sometimes we all do. And I can totally get behind that.
Yeah, I do. I completely agree with you. I don't feel any animosity that he might have towards Seattle or even vice versa. I think that he was just like, you know what, this isn't it for me. And I'm curious about your thought on this, because I thought about this. The offense has struggled. They've had moments where they look good, but they've not been good for a while. And yet we had Pete, defensive head coach. And then he turns around and hires another defensive head coach. Yeah. I'm wondering if DK just didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel, especially after the disaster of Grubb. And then he's like, it's the same old situation. We're going to rely on the defense and I'm not going to get anything. I'm going to go somewhere where they want to rely on me. And I'm okay with that.
Well, then look what happens. Even though Ryan Grubb was a unmitigated disaster, when they brought him in, I mean, if you're in DK Metcalf's shoes, you're thinking, shoot, look at the offense he ran at Washington. Look what he did for all those receivers. I'm going to be in the Rome Odunze role. Like, this is going to be great for me. And it didn't work out. And then they make all these changes on offense. They bring in an entirely new staff as a whole, guys that have been in the league for over a decade, many of them, doing one thing, and that's running the football, running a balanced offense. So all he's heard for the last month is how we're going to run the football more. I'm sure he looked into, Clint Kubiak. He's familiar with that scheme. A lot of 12 personnel, 13 personnel, not a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. He's like, that's not how I want to spend the prime of my career. So he forces his way out, even though, now he's sitting in Pittsburgh where they have Mason Rudolph. And,
he went to a not even better situation. Yeah. I don't know. And to another defensive head coach. I don't know.
He got paid though, right?
He sure did.
So you touched on the free agency stuff. Does the process feel differently to you this year? And maybe this is hard to answer just because we've had the big dramatic moves. And so it hasn't been a normal offseason, right? But typically what John likes to do is he bargain hunts and he value shops and he waits till wave 2 or 3 of free agency and he signs a bunch of guys on 1-year deals, right? And that backfired last year. None of those guys really contributed much.
And they're all gone.
Then they're all gone. Yeah. In other years, it's been hit or miss or whatever. And you could see the process. And he's not the only GM that does that and kind of hedges his bets heading into the draft and tries to cover up his biggest weaknesses. but I felt like this year they were more active on those first couple of days. First of all, they brought their own guys back. They got Jay Reed and they got Ernest Jones back. They go out and they make a couple of big splashes. They signed Cooper Kupp and DeMarcus Lawrence. It was not an insignificant signing either. And then it seems like they kind of shut it down. We're getting the little vet minimum role playing deals now, but I don't consider I don't consider those to be the same as what he was trying to do last year. He was looking for starters on those 1-year deals last year. Does it feel like the process might be a little different this year? Because all we keep hearing is how involved Mike Macdonald is, to your point earlier. Brock Heward's been talking about this a lot, that John Schneider is hell-bent on giving Mike Macdonald the team he wants. And I think we're going to find out.
Yeah, I think what's been interesting in this offseason is we've heard more, even in national news, the Seahawks name come up. This player, these 3 teams were involved. So there's definitely a higher level of activity than we're used to. Usually it's like, oh, I don't do anything in free agency, and we just kind of ignore it, whatever. But I feel like they were involved. They were in the mix for these offensive line players that we all so desperately wanted. He didn't get them. And that could be, they wanted, who was it? Fries to come take a physical. And he said, no, I'm just taking the cash because, maybe dodged a bullet there. So that could be good. And then you have these other guys that he was in the mix for. We just don't know why they didn't get them. Was it money? Was it, the physical? What was it? But at least we heard a little bit more, right? Like they were out there and the names were being kicked around a little bit. I agree with you that I think this doesn't feel like a John Schneider on an island kind of a free agency season. So I think that you're right, that Mike Macdonald is definitely more involved. I just don't still see the path, right? Like I'm not seeing the plan. Like I need this to fill out just a little bit more because there are still huge holes on this team that the draft is not going to fix all by itself. And so I think that we just need to see the process. Now, do I have more faith that maybe this offensive staff that has come in can develop some of these younger players? Yes. And so then maybe we won't have quite as many holes. But at the same time, it just feels a little Swiss cheesy still to me. And I'm really hoping that if they nail this draft, we'll start to kind of see a more cohesive plan for as much as we can being outside the room.
Yeah. And it does feel like, and I think this is where it's fair to wonder if some of the fan discontent and frustration is coming from this that I'm about to describe. But it does feel like this year's different in the sense that, we had hoped coming off last year, you win 10 games and you barely miss out on the playoffs due to a tiebreaker. And you've got pretty much, we anticipated, we knew that Reed and Jones were going to come back. And so we all went into this offseason thinking, okay, the defense was fixed. That was the biggest issue. Cost Pete Carroll his job, fixed it, brought in a defensive guy, fixed the defense. But now with Geno forcing his way out and DK doing the same and all these massive changes on offense now with the scheme and the coaching, and it's pretty clear that if we as fans thought this offseason they were just looking for a couple of pieces to put them over the top, kind of feels like we went right back to where we started last year again. In that, okay, now we need to wait and see. Like is this new scheme going to work? Is this staff going to be as good as their resumes indicate they may be? Are they going to be able to identify enough players from this group on the offensive line to fix it like they say they can? Because, we keep hearing every week that, part of the reason that John Benton and Rick Dennis and all these guys wanted to come on board is because they liked what they had on hand in that offensive line room. It feels like we're back kind of at square one, the same place we were last year, and that we might be looking at another 2-year process. And that's hard as a fan when your team just won 9, 9, and 10.
Right. And it's like last year when we were in that spot, when we're like, oh, we're building this up. There was the excitement of the new coach and what they could bring and what they could do. There's not that excitement this year. It's more of really again, like it is a little. And I try to remind myself I could be a Browns fan, right? Like I could be hitting my head against a brick wall over and over and over again.
Yeah,
but at the same time, it is very frustrating to just be in the same place that we have been for the last 5 years without any real feeling of a change, except on the defensive side of the ball. I think that we really can start to feel pretty settled in there. I still think there's a couple pieces that they need, but you feel pretty good there.
Yeah.
But then you have to question whether or not oh my God, did the offense get even worse? Like, where are we at with that? It's a hard place to be. We have to remind ourselves it's March. I mean, really.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you are going to undertake reconstruction of the offense, better to do it when you can count on the defense, right? 13 players currently on the roster that started games last year for the Seahawks. And then you add DeMarcus Lawrence to that list. I know defense is your favorite thing. You mentioned that there's still some work to be done over there, but do you feel like the defense is mostly set as it sits here today, or is there like one or two things that you'd really like to see them still do?
I really want a nasty edge rusher. I really want someone to go after that quarterback. I'm not saying they can't. We have some players that can do it, and I like the development of Mafe, and I like where he's done. But I think in that you need someone who is just lethal off that edge, and I think that would take this to a completely different level. Luckily, this draft has quite a few handfuls of them, right?
Well, I was going to follow that up. Is that your preference at 18 there? Then is that where your focus is?
No. Oh my God, no. In fact, that's just it. It is so deep in this draft. I don't think you have to take, the edge rusher. I say that. And then there's a couple of the defensive players that I absolutely love. But I think at 18, you have to address that offensive line. You have to address, one of those players, depending on who is sitting there. Now, this draft is all over the place, right? We're getting, all the quarterbacks shoved down our throats as we did. I heard someone compare it to the same year Mariota was drafted. It's like, we heard all the hype, but there's nothing much behind it when it comes to quarterbacks. So that makes me a little worried that these offensive linemen are going to fly off the board, right? And so, because everyone needs offensive linemen, but if you have if you have Booker sitting there at 18, you have to take Booker, right? Like, you just have to. There's a couple of players in there that I think you have to at 18. But let's say they get completely sucked up in the first 17 picks, and there are a couple guys you can wait for. I think that, do you take the best defensive player available? Maybe. We're not taking a running back. I don't know who floated that out there. I swear to God, it's like, please. But I think that would be exciting. But I really think that in order to appease the fan base, in order to appease every critic John Schneider has, if there is one of those top offensive linemen, you have to take them. You have to.
Well, I didn't bring you in here to drill you about all your favorite draft prospects and all the different decisions. I mostly want to talk to you about what you heard from prospects in Indianapolis, because one thing that as I try to over the years kind of hone my scouting instincts, one thing that really drove home for me 2 years ago that I overlook sometimes in the process is the interviews. And that sometimes that's where you can really identify who's a Seahawk. Right. We know, and we're not the only team that does this, but we see a lot of other teams willing to compromise sometimes on their principles in order to take a certain player that might have some red flags. The Seahawks just don't. They're very uncompromising, and they stick very strongly to smart, tough, dependable, and all ball and all of that. They just don't want to take any risks. They learn their lesson from a couple of bad drafts and trades. Yeah. They just don't touch those types of players anymore. And what drove that home for me 2 years ago is if I had known Derek Hall's story before the draft that year and listened to him talk about it or anything, I would have had him in just about every mock draft I did. I didn't, because I just didn't think he was a twitchy enough edge rusher for what we were looking for that year in the draft. And so now I watch the interviews as much as I watch the tape. Well, you got to be there. Yeah. So you put a little list together for me today of 5 guys that you thought, as you were listening to him speak, just sounded like Seahawks. Just start at the top here and kind of tell me first about Nick Emmanwori, which right off the bat, you're going to be really popular with a bunch of my viewers because he's kind of the biggest draft crush out there in Seahawk land right now.
And why wouldn't he be? He's Cam Chancellor II, right? And the funniest thing about this is that in his interview, you're standing there and he was asked about being compared to Cam Chancellor, and he just grinned from ear to ear. It was the best thing ever. They had the same coach. His coach in college also coached Cam Chancellor, and he just has that feel. But it was the way he was talking about literally hitting people. You're like, yeah, that's the guy right there. That is that nasty back end player that you want to come in, who isn't just like, oh, a meathead going to go hit somebody, like the smart, savvy kind of a player. And I really, I really enjoyed it, but it was just the obvious pure joy he talked about when he talked about being in the backfield, the impact a safety can make, and being compared to Cam Chancellor. And he had said that, yes, he had definitely spoken to the Seahawks. And so it was just really exciting. Then you go look at his tape and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy is just a freak of nature. And I think he would be fantastic in this defense.
Yeah, I was kind of off the Emmanwori bandwagon for a minute. I thought the Cam Chancellor comps were a little too generous, to be honest.
Okay.
Just based on the tape that I had seen.
Mhm.
I thought the Kyle Hamilton comps were a little bit more accurate. I thought he was a little bit more of a finesse player. But then I just realized hadn't watched the right games, and I have since come around, and he certainly looks like someone that Mike McDonald would just have a lot of fun with.
Right.
I mean, I kind of did he talk much about his preferred role, because he seems like the kind of guy that it could go either way. There's a lot of him on tape covering the deep, the back half, right?
Yep.
But if he's going to be more of a Kyle Hamilton type player, and I kind of think the role that's open in Seattle right now is that big slot role. Did he talk a little bit about how he likes to be used?
Well, unfortunately, in these interviews, when you ask them that, their first instant answer is, I'll play wherever you tell me.
I can do anything.
I'll do whatever you want me to do. Do you have a preference? Nope. I'll do exactly what you tell me. What I got from talking to, exact. And that is, they've been coached to say these things, right? But I think the impression that I got was that he was very interested in being coached up. Like wherever you want him to be, he will soak in that information. And so I think that this is not someone who's going to look like one of those all-star, fabulous players right from the get. He's going to need a little bit of finessing and a welcome to the NFL moment. But I do think that he really has the ability to kind of be that player. And they'll find his spot for him. I agree with Kyle Hamilton's a really good, comp too. We hear that quite a bit, but I just think that he is ready to be coachable. Some of these players don't come off that way. They will rattle off thing. They're like, oh no, I did this and I do this and I do this and I do this. And that's it. And it's like, you just don't get that. But this kid was like, I don't care. I'll do whatever you want me to do. And it's like, that was exciting.
And that's it. You make such a great point, and that's why I think this exercise is valuable, because even with all the resources that these players have at their disposal now, they get coached up on what to say and how to handle these interviews and how to present themselves in the best light for these teams to improve their draft stock. And yet some of them still show up and say stuff that make you shake your head.
Oh yeah.
And make you take them off your draft board, which makes it an even bigger red flag, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna be that guy, right? Then good luck to you, because you're not going to be a Seahawk. The thing I like about the fit with Emmanwori in Seattle is he wouldn't have to be counted on day one to be like a superstar. When you're ready, you're ready, and McDonald will find a role for you.
Well, and that's any of these defensive players. They have those very strong vets to, I hate to say teach and mentor. I know that people hate that. It's not their job to mentor. No, it kind of is. And that's, if you want them to play on your team and play well, you're going to teach them, and you're going to mentor them. And so that all the defensive side of the ball, that's going to be a huge help for them.
Can't wait to hear what you have to say about Jahdae Barron. He's a guy that I've liked all the way through the process, in particular because I'm a big proponent. I want to get Devin Witherspoon's butt on the outside. I don't want him taking on guards every single week, 17 weeks a year at that frame. I would like to see him play more outside. A guy, Barron kind of reminds me of Witherspoon in some ways. What did you take away from his interviews?
So interesting with him. There were a couple of players that when you talk to them, they come across, I don't want this to sound disrespectful in any way, shape, or form, but some players don't come across as playbook smart as others. And it could be because they're nervous. It could be a million different reasons. It could be the position they play, whatever. He came across almost in coach speak, and not the too schmarmy was taught to say these things. He talked about the process and his process and what he does to get ready for game day. And that what he had learned, how he learned that this was his job. It wasn't just, for fun, and that he needed to take it seriously if he wanted to be taken seriously. And that conversation, I was filming him and my camera slid because I was so intently just listening to him. This is a kid. and this is one of the most high compliments I can give someone. He had Bobby Wagner level brain. Like, he was so smart in what he was saying, and in the way he was, talking about the plays and the process. And it wasn't, God knows I love Russell Wilson, but he'd be like, oh, my process is this, and da-da-da. And it was always a little used car salesman-y. Not this guy. He was like, I learned this my freshman year, and I learned this my second year, and da-da-da. And I was just so impressed that it is obvious his football knowledge is through the roof.
Just want to get to this real quick. We got a super thanks from the Snail. Appreciate the donation. However, he's not happy with the process so far this offseason. He says John Schneider's put together he did put together a toxic offensive staff last year, that there was a meltdown this offseason. That's what happened, and he should be fired for it. You agree with that?
Not this year, but if he didn't get it together this year, I think he's gone.
Well, and I think it's important to point out again, and I know it's been talked about, over and over again, but not because it's not true, in that by the time they hired Mike McDonald last year, what was there to choose from? Like, there weren't a bunch of really, really accomplished veteran offensive coordinators just sitting at home waiting for a call. They took a shot. They took a risk on a guy that had never coached the NFL level, and it didn't work, and so we are where we are, right? Okay. So Tyler Booker
what is there to say about this kid? He's just fabulous, right?
I can't wrap my head around, so the ability is undeniable, and he's everything you want in a guy that's lacking from this current offensive line too. It needs some nasty, right? It needs some maulers. It needs some bullies, and he certainly is one. There are questions about the scheme fit, but there are those who think he's so good at what he does, including the off the field stuff, that you figure out a way to make it work. And then honestly, even though the testing numbers weren't great at the combine, you wouldn't expect him to be at 335 pounds. But I thought in the movement drills, sure looked like he could get to the second level to me. And it's the other stuff, the intangible stuff that he's supposed to be like next level at, right? Is that what you got while you were down there?
Yeah, unfortunately, I did not get to interview him, and I was sad about that. But I'm with you. I've watched other things, things that you talked about. I agree with you completely, 100%. It is that I trust that Benton could probably get something out of him. I think that that's really important. But I also think that sometimes we take the testing and the stuff way too seriously, and you have to look at the intangibles. You have to look at the other stuff that they have. And is that something that is moldable to what you need them to do? Or let's just be honest, he's 330 pounds, stick him on the damn line and see what he can do, right? I'm just all about that kind of big beastie mentality sometime. And so I think that that's where he could bring that in. There are plenty of offensive linemen in this draft that could do the same. I just kind of like this kid.
Well, and he had the best quote of the combine when he was asked what he loves most about football. And he said, making the guy across from me not love football anymore. That's
you need that in your locker room, right? You need that
gold medal combine quote right there. It doesn't get much better than that. Terrence Ferguson, one of my favorite tight ends in this class. And really, because of the combine, honestly, the whole week I was in Mobile, he didn't really stand out to me. I thought he was fine, but he didn't stand out. I guess there's no other better way to say it. Maybe because Mason, Arroyo, a couple other guys down there just looked so good. But then you see him in the combine, and my goodness, this guy's an athlete. But what was he like as an interview?
He was fabulous. And I think one of the reasons why I even put him down, and I told you this, but maybe I should tell listeners, when I pick these players, I pick them a lot of times for the conversations we've had, for the players. I also watch their tape and I like them. I'm not going to pick, we need to get this guy in the second round and he's, an undrafted free agent. But you get a feel of this. He was so, I hate to say this, but he was so nice. And he was so thorough in his answers. And he was, humble and not too over the top. We had some pretty over the top guys at the combine this year, which I get a kick out of. I think they're fun. But this kid just stuck out as someone who, am I correct? He's is he the kid that's 6'5"? He's ridiculously tall. If I remember, I think he's 6'5", 260. Yeah. And I love that in a tight end. And so I was just looking and I'm like, you know what? This is a kid I think that would really kind of fit in Seattle. you need that super tall. He said he was all about blocking, although I think I read that he needs to work on that some, but he said he would do, of course, whatever was asked of him. But I really got a good feel from this kid.
Yeah. And we need another tight end. I mean, that's, regardless of what happens with Noah Fant, as much as Kubiak likes to use his tight ends, need another one. Mm-hmm. And then I am so glad to see that you included Femi Oladejo on your list. He has been one of my favorites since I got back from Mobile. Mm-hmm. Like this is sort of, I think, the example this year of like I referenced Derek Hall. Like as soon as I heard some interviews with him and heard about his story and then watched him on the field, obviously, and the way he goes about things and just the physique and how he's built and everything else is like, and they call him the mayor, I think is his nickname. Like
he goes by Femi. Half of his teammates call him O2, he says, because they couldn't pronounce either one of his names. They call him the mayor. Here's the thing. He was one of the first interviews I did the first day we were there. And it was 8:00 in the morning. And he go over and he's at one of the big podiums. There's 8 big podiums and 3 small tables. And he was up there and just having this great conversation. But I have to tell you what got me was he was talking about being switched from linebacker to edge. And he said it was about 6 games in last year, maybe not even that many. And they knew their linebacker room. He's like, we knew our linebacker room was really good. It's really solid. So he came to me and they said, you know what, let's just put you on the edge and see what happens. He thought it was for 1 game and he never left again. And he fell in love with the position. He said as a linebacker, he had the dot. So he was making the decisions. He had to make sure everyone was he was the boss and he had to make sure where everyone was. And he said when he got switched to the edge, the ball snapped and he could just go hit somebody. And I was like, yep. But he had the biggest smile on his face. He was so nice, so smart. Again, that super high, level of football. Cause he, at the combine, they like to ask him about plays. I think they're trying to trip him up or something. I hate it when they do that. And man, he could just rattle that off. But he was just like, it was like snap the ball and I could just go hunt. And he loved it. I was like, yes, I like this kid a lot.
So you didn't tell me you were going to reference that quote. I didn't know know you were going to, but let's just let people listen to it. The audio is not great here, but I just happen to have that. So here you go, folks.
But I think it just gave us the chance to get the best level on the field. Going into our season, we knew that our linebacker room was the strongest core of the defense. We had guys like myself, Oladejo, Camadrano, Carson, John Barnes, Donovan Pilat, the list goes on. But after the end of the game, we had to really reflect and see, okay, how can we get the best 11 on the field? And Coach asked me to play in really just for the week against LSU, and we just took week by week, and now we're here.
I think that's my video. If not, I was standing right next to whoever took that picture. Yeah, I love it. No, it's awesome. Yes.
It was on another channel. Don't know if they stole it or not, or maybe
it doesn't matter. I put it out there. You guys can have it. I don't care. Here's the thing is that he just exudes joy for the game. And I just feel like he is one of those guys that comes in and makes your locker room a better place. Like, I really like this kid.
Yeah. And for those of you who are mock draft addicts like I am, don't be thrown by the fact that he is way too low on most of the simulators out there. I think he's going to go in day 2. I just think he's risen up into that range. I think the athleticism and just the untapped potential with how little he's played edge and how natural he is there. And then the intangibles, as you mentioned. And the cool thing about that soundbite too, is he moving to edge not only completely changed his profile and trajectory and has him standing here now as a top 100 prospect, but also did the same for Carson Schwessinger, who we mentioned there, because it gave him a chance to play full time. And now he's a day 2 pick at inside linebacker. So
he's slowly moved up. I think he started about 4th round. And I think people now are getting him to like the upper thirds, but you're right. I think he's drastically underrated.
And I did prepare a little bit. I forgot about this. I was going to run this when you were talking about Terrence Ferguson. I just wanted to show the viewers this, but just a couple of Senior Bowl reps here. Just really smooth in how he moves. He doesn't look really dynamic in anything that he does, but just really smooth. And in that way, kind of reminds me quite a bit of AJ Barner, to be honest with you. And that worked out okay for the Seahawks last year, didn't it? Yeah. I threw a couple of names onto this myself.
I have one other one I want to tell you about too, but go ahead.
Honorable mention. No, let's start. Let's start with you.
Oh, so actually I saw someone mention this in your chat. So I
haven't peeked at the chat yet, other than to see
there is a player out there named Frasier. Okay. Plays for UTSA. Same place, Tariq Woolen
He's
came
kind
from.
of Rick Woolen 2.0.
Yes. I was obsessed with this kid after talking to him. First of all, he was at one of the tables, right? He wasn't even up at the big podium. I walked up and I was chatting with him, but I had him written down because I like small school players. I always have liked small school players. I think that they are ignored a lot. And so I went and checked out his table. Well, standing there were two of his coaches off to the side. And I was waiting because, they kind of come out at different times. And he's like, "Are you here to see Zahn?" I said, "Yeah, I love small school. I love, I'm kind of a Seahawks person." So he's like, "Oh, Tariq Woolen, da, da, da." But anyway, the coach said he had never gone to a combine before, but he wanted to come here because people had to know who this kid was, because he was going to make a huge difference on whatever team got him. Now, this is a kid, very end of the draft, if not even undrafted free agent. But after talking to him, he built a little bit like Richard Sherman, so you get kind of that lanky cornerback thing going, but really enjoyed him. Really super grounded kid, really liked him. I would love for Seattle to just go grab him. And I'm wondering if he might be on their radar because of Tariq Woolen, because they did play together.
Sure.
I think, earlier.
Yeah, as much as Schneider, really values connections and coaching staff and familiarity. And he's, his profile is so similar. He's a converted wide receiver, and now he's playing corner, and he's long and lanky. And for all of you fans who want the Seahawks to trade Rick Woolen, well, you can just replace him with the guy that replaced him at UTSA, right?
It's fair.
I threw a couple names on here too, guys that I've really just fallen in love with, just personality wise, right? And don't, this may or may not be fits, although I think the first two absolutely are. I think Ty Robinson is everything Mike McDonald wants in defensive lineman. He can play inside or out. He's just really, really tenacious, high motor all the time. He's a little bit of an older prospect, but that means he's experienced. He's played a lot of high level football, and the way he talks about the game just feels Seahawky to me. I think Jack Besh's story is very, very well known up to this point, and everything he's gone through with his brother and everything else and how he handled that. And also just his style of play. He just screams like Shanahan, McVay, like that passing tree offense. He just looks like Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Robert Woods, like that kind of a receiver. I think he'd fit in really well. And then I put Milroe on here just because I don't know from just a quarterback perspective if he's a guy Schneider's going to fall in love with. I think Schneider tends to like guys that are a little bit more technically proficient. But that being said, two of the guys that he felt the most in love with were Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. It's been, widely reported. And those were guys that were very raw coming out of college also. But I think the reason that I think he'll grade out pretty highly as far as the Seahawks go with the intangible stuff is just how he carries himself. This guy's going to kill any interview that he walks into. And I think he's going to convince some coaching staffs that he's worth the risk, and that maybe 3 years down the line, he might be a really fun player.
Right.
So.
What do you think? I'm sorry, the interviewer.
No,
do you think that they're going to draft a quarterback this year?
I go back and forth. I honestly, this may be a cop-out answer. I think if the board falls a particular way, I think so. I think signing Sam Darnold changes that equation. I think if it had been anyone else, they'd be one of the teams looking as hard at quarterback as any, and they still might. I think that John has been waiting to fall in love with the guy in the draft for a long time and actually have that player fall to him. It hasn't happened since 2012. I think there are some other years that if things had gone slightly differently, we'd be sitting here having a different conversation about who's playing quarterback. But I think they see Darnold as option one, I believe, is they think this guy's got a shot to be our franchise quarterback for the next 10 years or 8 years, whatever, however long you think that quarterbacks can play in the NFL. And so I don't necessarily think they feel like they need to draft one this year. But if they fall in love with a guy and he falls to him, I could see it. I could see any range of possibility. I know that's a cop-out answer. I know people want
it's kind of true.
I think I could see him taking a quarterback at 18. I think that John Schneider probably loves Jackson Dart. He's probably really high on their board. I think he'd be in play at 18. But for the most part, when I do mock drafts, I just did a show on this the other day, kind of showing taking a quarterback versus not, and what that does to the value of your draft after that. It's that third round range, that 90 and 92 or 89 and 92, where they're sitting there, where there's kind of a group of a few guys there that I think have some starter traits. The McCords and the Ewers and the Howards and guys like that might be lumped in there. if the draft goes as well as they hope it does in the first 3 or 4 picks, I could see him doing that. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's a priority though anymore.
No, that's I fluctuate the same. Like you sound just like me, right? Because I can't decide, because I've had that question asked of me so much, and I'm like, I mean, hell if I know, because it just is going to depend on who he sees and who is sitting there. I think that he gets very stuck on certain players, and so if he gets close to one, he's going to take that player. It's not because he's like, I have to draft a quarterback this year.
Right.
Would this maybe be a good year to get one of those guys further down? Because you have a couple years, you could develop them and see what happens. Sure. I mean, you're not going to it's not going to break the bank to have some kid, just sitting on your bench and learning and see if they can do it. But you're right. It's not a priority. And if he takes a quarterback at 18, I will lose my ever loving mind.
I would prefer, I've been saying this for months now. I would prefer that he takes somebody at some point. I think he needs to, until Sam Darnold either is or isn't the guy and establishes that, they need to start taking one every year. Just taking bites of the apple. They have extra picks this year. It's the perfect time to do it. It's an intriguing enough class that there are some guys more layered through. It's not like last year where after the top guys are gone, there's nobody there till the 5th round. We'll see. It'll certainly be a storyline going into the draft. I think everyone's waiting for it. The hard part is that we got so good at like kind of figuring out their MO with Pete and John working together. Especially the last 3 or 4 years, like all of a sudden it's like, oh, we can kind of predict now who they're going to take because they have some tells, right? They like guys from big schools that have played a lot of snaps, and they kind of got away from getting too cute like they were in the mid-teens after the Super Bowl. But now there's so many variables, right? With the new offensive coaching staff and then McDonald, and he came in late in the process last year. I have no idea. Which is part frustrating, but also it's very, very invigorating. It's fun.
Mike McDonald said that at the combine also when he did his coach's interview. They asked him, we all asked him, because it was so funny. He walked out from behind the curtain, because there's always a curtain. He walked out and he started laughing. He goes, we flew 2,000 miles to talk to the same people, because it was all the Seattle beat reporters.
Answer the same questions.
Yeah, exactly. But he did say that this was a very different year for him. He felt so much more involved. He wasn't scrambling because he had just gotten this job, that he really has kind of settled in. So I'm interested to see how that plays out this year.
Yeah. All right, let's get to some of the comments and questions, shall we? You ready? Shane Turner, always a great supporter. Thank you again for the super thanks. Tyler Booker, I'd rather have a guy who can just play O-line great rather than aim for a specific scheme fit. Good players are good players. I get that. But this isn't, remember Ryan Grubb last year at this time was telling us, well, we'll figure out what we're good at and then we'll lean into that. We might do some gap power. We might do some outside zone. That sort of confusion and indecisiveness showed up on the field, and they never found an identity. Right. We thought they did in Arizona by being more of a power pulling team, and then they just scrapped it and stopped going back to it. So I do think they brought this staff in to run this specific scheme, and if they don't believe that Booker can be great in that scheme, it'll affect his grade. But at the end of the day, he might just fit that category of he's so good, he'll make it work. Right.
Yep.
Shane Turner also says, take Kenneth Grant at 18, trade up for Booker. Realistic. You might be able to get Booker at 18 and trade up for Grant, because kind of the way that first round seems to be falling is Grant seems to be sort of between 20 and 30, which I kind of think is criminally low for him, honestly. Did you get a chance to talk to Kenneth Grant at all?
I did not. No. No, sorry, guys.
And then Dougzilla Monster says, I have a first round date with Dayna at Fireside Tavern.
Nope.
Any idea what that's about?
No idea.
Dougzilla is one of my most fun and eccentric viewers. So yeah, just likes to talk about guitars and things like that.
Well, there you go.
Let's get into the comments and questions and stuff and scroll all the way down. And we've probably already addressed a bunch of it. So John McGrath, this would be a great year to build up the lines and add depth everywhere else, then go all in on a quarterback next year if you need to. Yeah, I do think that that does make more sense. Generally the consensus seems to be that next year could be a better quarterback class. We never know these days, right? Transfer and NIL and everything else. All these people that keep telling me that we should play for Arch Manning. I I don't think he's coming out after 1 year.
Oh, I don't think so either. I think he'll be 2 more years. Yeah.
I don't think he's that kind of kid. I think he has bigger priorities. You can make money staying in college now. I think that's a little bit. Oh, okay. Doc Silla says, you just haven't heard about it yet. All right. Let's not get into any trouble here. But talking about building up the trenches here, Hawkamaniac says Donovan Jackson for me. He's another guy that I really love. Were there any of the other offensive linemen in particular really stand out to you as like, oh, I'd really like to have that guy?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't get to interview them. I had to leave on Saturday, and they left them for the last dang day. And I had my daughter's birthday, so I had to get back, which bothers me because that was the one group that I really wanted to kind of dig into. And it's like, I think that offensive linemen kind of get a bad rap that I said this earlier, but they're just, meatheads, they're Iowa farm boys, whatever you want to say. So not true. And when you get the really smart, when you get the Jason Kelsey type smart on the offensive line, it just permeates the entire line. So I was really bummed that I didn't get a chance to get in there and talk to them because I wanted to see if I could find one of those guys.
Bill Anderson says they have 5 picks in the top 100, actually the top 92, and possibly could change that to 6. Just based on everything you've seen from this draft class right now and what might be available at 18, are you in favor of staying there or trading down?
It just depends on who's there, but I will tell you, nothing would surprise me. I would prefer they stuck. I would prefer that they picked at 18. It's that mid-level, but I think there's just so much talent. And like was mentioned before, this is really kind of a lunch pail draft. Like you can really thicken out, and get some good depth. And I say this all the time. And so people who watch shows I'm on are probably sick of me saying it, but that is what made the Super Bowl era Seahawks so good, was the depth of their lines because they rotated them. And so I really would love to see that again. And so I think that this is really good. But if I had a preference, I would really prefer that they stuck. I think for so many years, we got so used to Schneider getting out of the first round and going back. I really want him to stick
to a fault, I think. And one thing I'll say about John is, and I've had some pretty heated debates with people about this, that they just think he's stuck in his ways. He's never going to change. I think he's changed a lot. And I think you can pinpoint specific trades, specific drafts that didn't go the way they wanted it to. And he changed his approach afterwards. And the biggest one, I think it was 2019, the LJ Collier year. And that was, and I've used this analogy a lot, for people that think that they'll never fix the offensive line. Well, that's what we were all saying about the defensive line in 19 and 20. After they traded Frank Clark, like that defensive line was kind of a shambles. And they always seemed to be playing for like 3 or 4 years there. They were always playing catch up. And they were always trying to get ahead of it with that position, and they couldn't. And that was the year that kind of exemplified it all. They trade Clark. They tried to replace him in that draft. It was a great edge class. They traded down like 3 times. They missed out on all the edges they wanted. They had to settle for Collier because they reached for need, and that turned out to be a disaster. I think they changed. In fact, I think that might be the last year we traded back.
Traded out. That's what I was just thinking. I think that might be the last year that they did that. And I do think that we have seen a switch, at least in my opinion. And that the draft is not like my forte, but I've really tried to pay more attention the last few years. But I really feel like that instead of, like I said, he sees a guy and he sticks to it, I think he is trying to get the best player available, which there are pros and cons to doing that. You can have 4 of the best cornerbacks out there, and it's not going to help your team. But I do think that there is definitely some logic to that. So I think we're seeing that a little bit more. Yeah.
I can't wait for this draft. I think I'm as excited about it as I have been for any in a long time. Obviously a couple of years ago, we had 2 of the top 10. That was cool. Or 2 of the top 20. That was fun.
That was super fun.
But I think it's because I think the reason I'm so intrigued is because I think more than anything we've seen from the day Mike McDonald was hired and John Schneider got to take over as GM, without Pete being involved in the process, I think this draft is going to tell us the most about how these guys are going to go about their business and what they're trying to build. I really do. And I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised. I do believe, I know you can sense when Schneider's talking about the offensive line on his coach's show, right? He's going to do another one tomorrow. He's tired of talking about it.
Oh God, we're all tired of talking about it.
I feel like he's trying to be like as diplomatic as he can. He's trying to give fans something they want. And I feel like he's been pretty transparent throughout the process. You know, he promised us they were going to be aggressive in free agency. They went out and offered Will Fries the biggest contract they've ever offered to an offensive lineman in their history. Didn't work out. And then they just didn't like any of the other guys enough to take a chance on him. And I think their plan is they're going to address it in the draft along with the other trench too. I really do. I think this is going to be one of those drafts that people go, now I see,
Right.
now I see what they're trying to build.
Right. And that was my whole point at the beginning of the show was we can't figure out the plan right now because the pieces that they wanted did not come to them. So after the draft, I'm really hoping we get a much better view of what that plan is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. So good to have you back on the show again.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much.
It's been a while. It's been so long since we did that app. I couldn't even remember. PSF, right? Isn't that what it's called?
Yes. Pro sports fan.
Sports fan. Are you going to the draft again this year?
I'm not going to the draft because I went to the combine. I switched it up and we have someone else that's going to cover the draft. And I mean, it's in Green Bay, so I wasn't heartbroken about not going, but I think that, but I'll probably go again. The draft, this is the first year I went to the combine, and the draft and the combine are two completely different worlds. And I can tell you without question, you get a lot more information at the combine than you do at the draft. The draft is like Christmas morning and teams get to unwrap their presents, right? But right. It's like, and so you get these conversations with these kids, but they're in La La Land. They're so happy. So, and you only get the ones, because with less and less kids now, they're kids to me. Players going to the draft, you don't get as much. It was 8 people for every 20 minutes for 4 hours. And it was just so much fun. So,
well, I plan on going next year and I plan on staying till the very last day when the offensive line.
I am now too. I'm not leaving next year.
Because I'm sure you saw the same pictures, but like so many people left on Sunday. You could have had all the time you wanted with all the offensive line prospects.
I know. Lesson learned.
Lesson learned, indeed. Well, it's always good to have you on, Dayna. OurTurf Football, Real Hawk Talk. Let people know where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, so I'm on all the social medias. I'm on the Bird app still at Dayna OG, and then we're also on Blue Sky. I'd love for people to come talk to me on Blue Sky if you're over there too. So that's also at Dayna OG. And then OurTurf Football, we do. We're taking a little hiatus till a couple weeks before the draft, and then we're every Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and then Real Hawk Talk every few weeks when those boys get a little nutty.
Absolutely. You gotta lend some levity, and you gotta
bring them back down.
You gotta brighten up that room a little bit, right?
That's right. All
right, Dayna. Thanks. We'll catch up again after the draft.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
All right. See you.